The giant space station floated in the darkness between stars like a metal city, made of gleaming towers and spinning rings. Olympus 7 was bigger than most planets and home to millions of alien soldiers from across the galaxy. Ships came and went every hour, bringing new recruits and supplies for the endless war against the Shadow. Swarm Duck Captain Lee Taman pressed his face against the small window of the transport ship and watched the station grow larger as they approached. He had seen many amazing things during his 20 years as a Korean Special Forces soldier, but nothing like this. The station had weapons that could destroy moons in training, grounds where gravity could be turned up or down with the flip of a switch. Behind him sat 12 other human soldiers, all handpicked from Earth's best military units. Sergeant Kim Bo-ra was checking her equipment for the 100th time, while Private Park Jin-ho stared out another window with his mouth open. These 13 humans were about to become the first of their species ever accepted into the Galactic Defense Union's elite strike force. The journey from Earth had taken 6 months, even with faster-than-light travel. During that time, they had studied files about the different alien species they would be working with. The Krillians were 8 feet tall with skin like stone that could stop bullets. The Vextar moved so fast they looked like blurs and had 4 arms that could each hold a different weapon. The Thorns were bred for war and knew nothing but fighting from the moment they were born. Taman wondered how humans would fit in among such powerful beings. On Earth, he was considered one of the strongest and fastest soldiers alive, but compared to these aliens, he felt like a child. The briefing materials had warned them that most alien species saw humans as weak newcomers who had barely learned to leave their home planet. The docking process took 3 hours as their small ship was guided through layers of security and scanned by dozens of different sensors. When they finally stepped onto the station, Taman felt the artificial gravity pull him down harder than Earth's gravity. The air tasted strange and had a metallic smell that made his nose wrinkle. The docking bay was enormous with a ceiling so high, it disappeared into shadows. Alien soldiers moved back and forth carrying supplies and equipment. Most of them stopped to stare at the humans with expressions ranging from curiosity to amusement. A few pointed and whispered to their companions, obviously discussing the new arrivals. Lieutenant Yoon Dae-ho, the youngest member of their group, stepped closer to Taemin and spoke quietly. He said he felt like an ant that had wandered into a convention of giants. Several nearby Krillian soldiers laughed at something one of them said, while looking directly at the humans. Taemin told his team to ignore the stares and focus on their mission. Their escort arrived 15 minutes late, which Taemin suspected was intentional. The alien was a Vextar with blue-gray skin and 4 arms, each ending in hands with too many fingers. It introduced itself as Commander Zix and spoke in heavily accented Galactic Standard, the common language used throughout the Union. Commander Zix led them through corridors lined with windows showing the vast emptiness of space. Other corridors opened onto training areas where alien soldiers practiced with weapons that fired energy beams or practiced hand-to-hand combat that would have killed normal humans instantly. The sounds of battle echoed through the halls, along with roars and shouts in dozens of different alien languages. Their quarters were located in Section 7, which Commander Zix explained was near the maintenance areas and waste processing plants. The message was clear. Humans were being placed at the bottom of the station's social hierarchy. Their rooms were small and cramped with barely enough space for their equipment and personal belongings. Sergeant Bo-ra examined their accommodations with the practiced eye of a soldier who had lived in worse conditions. She pointed out that at least they had their own bathroom facilities and the beds were long enough for human bodies. Private Jin-ho complained that his room smelled like engine oil, but Taemin reminded him they were not here for luxury accommodations. The first meal in the common dining hall was an experience none of them would forget. The massive room could seat thousands of beings and the noise level was incredible. Alien soldiers of every size and shape sat at long tables eating foods that ranged from normal-looking to completely disgusting. The humans found an empty table in one corner and tried to blend in. The food dispensers offered hundreds of different options, but most were designed for alien digestive systems. Taemin and his team found items that looked safe to eat and settled down to observe their new environment. Almost immediately, they became the center of attention, as alien soldiers noticed the newcomers and began discussing them openly. A group of Krillian soldiers at a nearby table were particularly loud in their comments about human appearance and size. One of them made a joke about using humans as emergency rations if food supplies ran low. Another suggested that humans might be useful for cleaning small spaces that larger beings could not access. Corporal Lee. Minjun started to stand up with anger on his face, but Tai Min caught his arm and shook his head. He had learned during his years in special forces that sometimes the best response to insults was no response at all. The captain continued eating his meal and advised his team to do the same. The laughter and comments continued throughout their meal. Some aliens took pictures or videos of the humans, obviously planning to share them with friends on other stations. A few seemed genuinely curious about human capabilities, but most appeared to view them as entertainment or curiosities rather than fellow soldiers. They prepared to leave the dining hall. A shadow fell across their table. General Vos Kralik stood behind Taemin's chair like a mountain of stone and muscle. The Krillian general was famous throughout the galaxy for his victories against the Shadow Swarm and his cruel treatment of soldiers he considered weak or unworthy. The dining hall grew quiet as other aliens noticed the confrontation developing. General Kralik's yellow eyes studied the humans like a predator examining potential prey. His scarred face showed no emotion as he looked down at Captain Taemin, who continued eating as if nothing was happening. The general spoke in a voice that carried across the entire hall, asking if these were the famous human soldiers he had heard so much about. His tone made it clear that whatever he had heard was not impressive. Several alien soldiers began gathering around to watch what would happen next. Taemin finished chewing his food and looked up at the massive general without showing any fear or anger. He confirmed that they were indeed the first human soldiers accepted into the Galactic Strike Force. General Kralik smiled, but it was not a friendly expression. He said he was looking forward to seeing what humans could do in actual combat situations. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife as hundreds of alien eyes watched the exchange between the human captain and the legendary Krillian general. Taemin's team remained seated, but their muscles were tense and ready for action. This first meeting would set the tone for everything that followed. General Kralik did not walk away from the human table as Taemin had hoped he would. Instead, the massive Krillian general pulled out a chair from another table and sat down facing the humans. The metal chair groaned under his weight and looked like a child's toy beneath his enormous frame. His presence made the air feel heavy and dangerous. The general began speaking loudly enough for everyone in the dining hall to hear him clearly. He talked about his many victories in battles across the galaxy and how he had personally saved entire solar systems from the Shadow Swarm. His voice boomed through the hall as he described crushing enemy warriors with his bare hands and leading charges that broke through impossible defenses. Other alien soldiers stopped eating to listen to stories they had heard many times before, but this time was different because General Kralik was telling these stories while staring directly at the human soldiers. His message was clear. He was a proven warrior while they were untested newcomers who had never faced real galactic threats. Sergeant Bora felt her jaw clench as the general's words became more insulting. He talked about how the Galactic Defense Union must be getting desperate if they were accepting soldiers from a species that had never left their home star system. He wondered out loud if humans even knew how to fight enemies that could not be defeated with primitive Earth weapons. Private Jinho's hands were shaking with anger, but he followed Captain Taemin's example and continued eating his meal. The young soldier had always been quick to defend his honor, but he trusted his captain's judgment completely. If Taemin wanted them to stay calm, then that is what they would do no matter how difficult it became. General Kralik seemed disappointed by the humans' lack of reaction to his insults. He had expected them to either cower in fear or explode with anger that would give him an excuse to put them in their place. Instead, they sat quietly eating their food as if his presence meant nothing to them at all. The general decided to escalate his verbal attacks. He began comparing humans to children playing war games with toy soldiers. He said that Earth's greatest military achievements would be considered minor training exercises by real galactic warriors. He suggested that humans would run away screaming the first time they faced an actual Shadow Swarm creature. More alien soldiers gathered around the table, forming a circle of witnesses. Some held up recording devices to capture whatever was about to happen. Others placed bets on how long it would take for the humans to break under the general's psychological pressure. The excitement in the air was building toward something explosive. Corporal Minjun whispered to Sergeant Bora, asking if they should just leave the dining hall to avoid further confrontation. But Bora shook her head, knowing that running away would only confirm every negative stereotype the aliens had about human courage. They were trapped between backing down and looking weak or fighting back and probably getting destroyed. General Kralik stood up from his chair and began walking slowly around the human table, like a predator circling wounded prey. He continued his verbal assault, describing in detail how previous species had failed when first joining the Union. He mentioned several races that had been kicked out for being too weak or cowardly to meet galactic military standards. The general stopped directly behind Captain Taman's chair and placed one massive hand on the human's shoulder. The weight of that hand felt like a stone crushing down, and Taman had to use all his strength to keep from being pushed forward onto the table. General Kralik squeezed just hard enough to cause pain without leaving obvious injuries. He leaned down and spoke quietly into Taman's ear, but his words carried clearly in the silent hall. He said that humans obviously did not understand how things worked in the real galaxy, where strength was the only thing that mattered. He suggested that perhaps humans would be happier working in the station's kitchens or cleaning facilities, rather than pretending to be soldiers. The alien soldiers laughed and cheered at this humiliation. Several began chanting for the general to show the humans their proper place in the galactic hierarchy. The noise grew louder and more aggressive as the crowd sensed that violence was about to begin. Some aliens started pushing forward to get better views of the coming confrontation. Captain Taman finally looked up from his meal and turned to face General Kralik directly. His voice was calm and quiet when he spoke, but something in his tone made several nearby aliens stop laughing. He thanked the general for sharing his wisdom and said that humans were indeed new to galactic warfare and had much to learn from experienced soldiers. This humble response seemed to satisfy General Kralik, who smiled with cruel pleasure. He had successfully established his dominance over the humans without having to resort to actual violence. He prepared to return to his own table, confident that the lesson had been learned and the proper order had been restored. But then Taman continued speaking. He mentioned that while humans were new to fighting galactic wars, they had been fighting each other for thousands of years on a planet where everything from the weather to the wildlife tried to kill them daily. He said that humans had learned to survive by being clever and adaptable, rather than relying purely on physical strength. The smile faded from General Kralik's face as he realized the human was not surrendering as expected. Several alien soldiers stopped cheering and began paying closer attention to the conversation. There was something in the human captain's tone that suggested this exchange was not over yet. Taman stood up slowly and turned to face the towering general completely. Even standing upright, he barely reached Kralik's chest, but he showed no fear or intimidation. He looked up at the alien's yellow eyes and spoke clearly so everyone could hear his next words. He said that humans understood they were the smallest and weakest species in the Galactic Defense Union. But he also said that on Earth they had learned that size and strength were not the only things that mattered in a fight. Sometimes the most dangerous opponents were the ones who looked harmless until it was too late to realize your mistake. General Kralik's face darkened with anger at this implied threat from such a tiny creature. The alien soldiers around them began murmuring excitedly, sensing that the confrontation was about to reach its climax. Some backed away slightly, not wanting to be caught in whatever explosion was coming next. The general reached out with one massive boot and kicked Captain Taman's chair, sending it sliding across the floor with a loud scraping sound. The human captain stumbled backward but managed to keep his balance. The dining hall erupted in laughter and cheers as the aliens celebrated their general's display of dominance. But as Taman straightened his uniform and looked back at General Kralik, something had changed in his eyes. The calm acceptance was gone, replaced by something cold and dangerous that made even some of the larger aliens feel uncomfortable. The laughter began to die down as more beings noticed the shift in atmosphere. General Kralik had just made the biggest mistake of his long military career, but he would not realize it until it was far too late to take it back. Captain Taman picked up his chair and set it back in its proper position with movements that were perfectly calm and controlled. He dusted off his uniform where it had been wrinkled by the sudden movement, then sat back down as if nothing unusual had happened. His face showed no anger or embarrassment, just the same quiet expression he had worn throughout the entire confrontation. The alien soldiers were still laughing and cheering, but some of the smarter ones had begun to notice something strange about the human's reaction. Most beings who were humiliated in front of hundreds of witnesses would show some emotion, whether anger or fear or shame. But Taemin acted like being kicked across the dining hall was just a minor interruption in his meal. General Kralik basked in the approval of his audience, confident that he had successfully put the upstart humans in their proper place. He raised his massive arms above his head and roared in triumph, causing the cheering to grow even louder. Several junior Krillian officers approached to congratulate their general on his masterful handling of the situation. Sergeant Bo-Ra watched her captain carefully and recognized the signs that other people often missed. She had served under Taemin for 8 years and had seen this exact expression on his face before. It was the look he got right before he did, something that completely changed the outcome of what seemed like a hopeless battle. The sergeant remembered their mission in Afghanistan when they had been surrounded by 50 enemy fighters who thought they had trapped a small group of helpless Korean soldiers. Taemin had worn the same calm expression while planning something that none of their enemies saw coming. By the time the sun rose the next morning, all 50 attackers were either dead or running for their lives. Private Jin-ho started to stand up from his chair, but Bo-Ra grabbed his arm and pulled him back down. She shook her head slightly and nodded toward their captain. The young soldier followed her gaze and saw the dangerous stillness that had settled over Taemin, like the calm before a terrible storm. General Kralik was telling his officers about how easily he had dominated the human leader when Taemin's quiet voice cut through the noise. The captain thanked the general for the demonstration and said he now understood how the social hierarchy worked on Olympus 7. His tone was polite and respectful, but something about it made the laughter die down. The general turned back toward the human table with a satisfied smile on his scarred face. He nodded approvingly and said that humans learned quickly when properly motivated. He suggested that as long as they remembered their place at the bottom of the station's pecking order, they would get along just fine with their galactic superiors. Taemin took a long drink from his water bottle, then stood up again and walked toward General Kralik with slow, measured steps. The alien soldiers watched with renewed interest, wondering what the tiny human thought he could possibly do now. Several began recording again, expecting to capture the human's final surrender or perhaps another humiliating punishment. The captain stopped just outside of arm's reach from the massive general and looked up at him with those same calm eyes. He said that he appreciated the lesson in galactic military customs and wanted to show his gratitude by offering a small demonstration in return. His voice carried clearly through the increasingly quiet dining hall. General Kralik laughed and asked what possible demonstration a weak human could offer that would interest battle-hardened galactic warriors. He spread his arms wide and invited Taemin to show everyone whatever pathetic skills humans thought were worth sharing. The alien audience laughed along with their general, clearly expecting more entertainment. At the humans' expense, Taemin explained that humans had developed certain techniques for dealing with larger, stronger opponents during their long history of warfare on Earth. He said that, while humans could never match the raw physical power of species like the Krillians, they had learned other ways to level the playing field when facing superior enemies. The general's laughter became louder and more mocking. He pointed out that he was twice as tall as the human, and probably 5 times as heavy, with skin that could stop bullets and bones that could not be broken by anything short of industrial equipment. He asked what possible technique could overcome such overwhelming physical advantages. Several alien soldiers began placing new bets on how quickly their general would crush whatever foolish challenge the human was preparing to offer. The odds were heavily in favor of the confrontation ending in less than 10 seconds with the human unconscious or begging for mercy on the dining hall floor, but other aliens who had been watching more carefully began to feel uncertain about what was happening. There was something about the human captain's confidence that did not match his apparent disadvantages. A few of the older, more experienced soldiers started backing away from the confrontation area, sensing that something unexpected was about to occur. Taemin suggested that since General Kralik was clearly the superior warrior, perhaps he would not mind a friendly sparring match to demonstrate the difference between human and Krillian combat abilities. He phrased the challenge in a way that made it impossible for the general to refuse without appearing cowardly in front of his own troops. The massive general's eyes lit up with cruel anticipation. The chance to physically dominate a human in front of hundreds of witnesses was too good to pass up. He agreed immediately and suggested they use the combat ring that was built into the center of the dining hall for exactly these types of demonstrations. Alien. Soldiers began pushing tables aside to clear the circular fighting area while others climbed onto chairs and tables to get better views of the coming massacre. The noise level rose again as beings called out encouragement to their general and made jokes about how long the human would remain conscious. As they moved toward the ring, General Kralik continued bragging about his physical superiority to anyone within hearing range. He mentioned that his reaction time was 3 times faster than any humans, and his strength was enough to lift a military hover tank over his head. He promised to be gentle so as not to accidentally kill the brave but foolish human captain. Sergeant Bora approached Taemin as he prepared for what looked like certain defeat. She whispered urgently that this was exactly what the aliens wanted, to see humans beaten down and humiliated in front of everyone. She suggested they could find some excuse to leave, maybe claiming that regulations prevented humans from fighting without proper authorization, but Taemin shook his head and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. He told her that sometimes you had to show bullies exactly what they were dealing with before they would treat you with respect. He reminded her of their mission on Jeju Island when they had faced similar odds against enemies who thought Koreans were weak and easy targets. The combat ring was cleared and hundreds of alien soldiers crowded around the edges to watch the spectacle. General Kralik stepped into the center, flexing his massive arms and beating his chest like a gorilla trying to intimidate a rival. The sound of his fists hitting his stone-like skin echoed through the hall like thunder. When Taemin entered the ring, the size difference was even more shocking than before. The human captain looked like a child who had wandered into a cage with a hungry bear. Several aliens laughed so hard they had trouble breathing, while others shook their heads in disbelief at the humans' apparent suicide mission. General Kralik announced the rules in a voice that boomed across the entire dining hall. The match would continue until one fighter surrendered or was knocked unconscious. He added with a nasty grin that since humans were known to be fragile, he would try his best not to cause any permanent injuries that would require expensive medical treatment. The combat ring fell completely silent as the 2 fighters faced each other in the center. General Kralik towered over Captain Taemin like a mountain of living stone, while the human captain stood perfectly still with his hands relaxed at his sides. The contrast between them was so extreme that several aliens wondered if this was some kind of elaborate joke. Hundreds of recording devices were pointed at the ring from every angle, as beings throughout the galaxy would soon watch footage of what everyone expected to be the shortest and most one-sided fight in Olympus 7 history. The betting had stopped because the outcome seemed so certain that no one was willing to take money on the human surviving more than a few seconds. General Kralik raised his massive fists and began moving toward his tiny opponent with the slow confidence of a predator that knew its prey had nowhere to run. His yellow eyes gleamed with anticipation as he planned exactly how he would end this pathetic display of human defiance. He decided to use just enough force to knock the captain unconscious without killing him outright. The alien soldiers around the ring began chanting their general's name in a dozen different languages. The sound grew louder and more rhythmic as hundreds of voices joined together in celebration of their champion's inevitable victory. Some aliens started drumming on tables and walls to add to the thunderous noise that filled the dining hall. Captain Taemin closed his eyes and took 3 deep breaths while the chanting continued around him. He was remembering his training with Master Park back in Seoul 20 years ago, when he had first learned the ancient Korean martial art called Sirium. The old master had taught him that true strength came not from muscles or size, but from understanding how to use an opponent's power against them. The human captain opened his eyes and looked up at General Kralik with an expression of complete calm. He bent his knees slightly and shifted his weight to the balls of his feet while keeping his hands loose and ready. To most observers, it looked like he was just standing there waiting to be destroyed, but Sergeant Bora recognized the fighting stance immediately. General Kralik decided he had given the crowd enough time to build excitement and launched his attack. He threw a punch with his right fist that had enough force behind it to shatter concrete and send a normal being flying across the room. The speed of his attack was impressive for such a large creature, and the sound of his fist cutting through the air was like a bomb exploding. But when his punch reached the spot where Taemin had been standing, the human was no longer there. The captain had moved at the last possible moment, slipping to his left just far enough to let the massive fist pass harmlessly by his head. The general's punch hit nothing but air, and his own momentum carried him forward off balance. Before Kralik could recover from his missed attack, Taemin struck with surgical precision. His elbow connected with a specific nerve cluster just below the general's ribs, in a spot that Korean Special Forces had identified as a weakness in Krillian anatomy. The impact looked insignificant compared to the alien's huge bulk, but the effect was immediate and devastating. General Kralik stumbled sideways as sharp pain shot through his entire torso. The nerve strike had disrupted the signals between his brain and his muscles, causing his coordination to falter unexpectedly. He looked down at the spot where he had been hit, trying to understand how such a small impact could cause so much discomfort. The alien crowd fell silent as they tried to process what they had just witnessed. Their invincible general had not only missed his target, but had somehow been hurt by a creature one-third his size. Several beings rubbed their eyes, thinking they must have seen something wrong, because what had happened seemed physically impossible. Kralik roared in anger and swung both fists at the human, determined to end this embarrassing situation immediately. But his movements were already becoming less coordinated as the nerve damage spread through his system. Taemin flowed away from both attacks like water around a rock, then struck twice more with pinpoint accuracy. The second strike hit another nerve cluster at the base of the general's neck, while the third targeted a pressure point behind his left knee. Each impact was perfectly placed and timed to cause maximum disruption to the Krillian's nervous system. Within seconds, the massive alien was struggling to maintain his balance, and his vision was starting to blur. What the watching aliens did not know was that humans had been preparing for this moment for decades. Earth's military scientists had studied every species in the Galactic Defense Union, cataloging their strengths and weaknesses with obsessive detail. They had identified pressure points and nerve clusters that could disable even the most powerful aliens if struck correctly. Captain Taemin had spent years learning these techniques until they became as natural as breathing. He knew exactly where to hit a Krillian to cause paralysis, and exactly how much force to use to avoid permanent damage. This knowledge had been passed down through generations of Korean martial artists who understood that skill could overcome raw power. General Kralik tried desperately to grab his elusive opponent, but his hands kept closing on empty air. The human moved with fluid grace, dancing around the increasingly clumsy attacks while landing his own strikes with mechanical precision. Each time the general missed, Taemin's counterattacks found their targets and caused more damage to his nervous system. The alien soldiers watching from around the ring began to murmur nervously as they realized their champion was in serious trouble. This was not how the fight was supposed to go, according to everything they thought they knew about the natural order of galactic hierarchy. Some started to understand that they might have seriously underestimated what humans were capable of achieving. Private Jin Ho watched with growing amazement as his captain systematically dismantled a supposedly superior opponent using techniques that looked almost like a deadly dance. The young soldier had seen Taemin fight before, but never against an alien, and never with such devastating effectiveness against such overwhelming physical odds. Sergeant Bo-Ra felt a surge of pride as she watched her commanding officer prove that human intelligence and training could overcome any physical disadvantage. She had always known that Taemin was special, but seeing him defeat a legendary galactic warrior was beyond anything she had imagined possible. General Kralik was now staggering around the ring like a drunk trying to walk in a straight line. His massive strength was useless when he could not coordinate his movements well enough to land a single blow on his much smaller opponent. Sweat poured down his stone-like face as he realized that somehow impossibly he was losing this fight. The chanting had stopped completely, and the dining hall was filled with shocked whispers as aliens tried to understand what they were witnessing. Many of them had served under General Kralik for years and had seen him win impossible battles against the most dangerous enemies in the galaxy. The idea that a tiny human could defeat him was shaking their understanding of reality. Taemin could see that his opponent was nearly finished, but he wanted to end the fight cleanly without causing unnecessary injury. He waited patiently for the right moment while avoiding the general's increasingly desperate attacks. When Kralik made one final wild swing that left him completely exposed, The human captain struck with perfect timing and precision. The final blow landed at the base of General Kralik's skull, where the spinal column connected to the brain. It was a technique that human special forces called the off switch, because it caused immediate unconsciousness without permanent damage. The massive Krillian's eyes rolled back in his head and he collapsed like a falling mountain. Commander Zix the Vexitar, who had escorted them from the docking bay, appeared at their table with a very different attitude than before. He apologized for the poor treatment they had received and offered to personally ensure they had access to all the training facilities and resources they needed. His four hands moved nervously as he spoke, showing clear signs of anxiety about how he had underestimated them. The most significant change came from the Krillian soldiers, who had been laughing loudest at the humans just hours earlier. A group of junior officers approached Captain Taemin and formally requested permission to learn about human fighting techniques. They explained that they had always relied on their natural physical advantages and had never considered that smaller opponents might have developed ways to overcome those advantages. Taemin agreed to share some basic self-defense techniques, but warned that mastering human martial arts required years of dedicated practice and study. He explained that the movements looked simple, but were based on deep understanding of anatomy, physics, and leverage that took time to develop properly. The alien officers listened with intense concentration, taking notes and asking detailed questions. As the evening continued, more and more aliens approached the human table with requests for information about Earth's military capabilities. Some wanted to know about human weapons and technology, while others were curious about training methods and tactical doctrines. Captain Taemin answered their questions carefully, sharing general information while keeping sensitive details classified. The transformation in how aliens treated the humans was remarkable and complete. Within hours, they had gone from being dismissed as weaklings to being recognized as potentially dangerous opponents who deserved careful consideration. The speed of this change showed how much the galaxy's military culture was based on demonstrations of strength and capability. Sergeant Bora observed the interactions around their table and realized that this was exactly what they had hoped to achieve when they accepted the assignment to Olympus 7. The goal had never been just to join the Galactic Defense Union, but to establish humanity as an equal partner worthy of respect and consideration in military planning and operations. Private Jinho was amazed by how many aliens wanted to talk with him about Earth's history and culture. Beings who had ignored him completely that morning were now asking about human wars, battles, and the development of martial arts over thousands of years. He found himself giving impromptu history lessons about Korean military traditions and the philosophy behind Asian fighting styles. The evening ended with Captain Taemin being invited to address a gathering of senior officers from multiple species who wanted to hear directly from him about human military doctrine and capabilities. This was an unprecedented honor for a newly arrived soldier and showed how dramatically their status had changed in just a few hours. As the human team prepared to leave the dining hall, they were approached by a group of medical personnel who had been treating General Kralik. The lead doctor reported that the general was awake and asking to speak with Captain Taemin personally. This request surprised everyone because Krillian warriors typically avoided contact with opponents who had defeated them in combat. The doctor explained that General Kralik wanted to understand exactly what had happened during their fight and how a human had been able to overcome his physical advantages so completely. He was particularly interested in learning about the nerve strike techniques that had disabled him so effectively. This curiosity suggested that the general's attitude toward humans had undergone a fundamental change. Captain Taemin agreed to visit the medical bay to speak with General Kralik once the doctors confirmed it would not interfere with his recovery. This meeting would be the first step toward what would eventually become an unlikely alliance between two very different warriors who had gained mutual respect through combat. The events of that evening in the dining hall would be remembered as the moment when humanity truly joined the galactic community, not as junior partners seeking acceptance, but as equals who had proven their worth through skill, determination, and courage. The ripple effects of that single fight would continue to spread throughout the galaxy for years to come. General Kralik hit the deck with a thunderous crash that shook the entire dining hall and caused several nearby tables to jump off the floor. His massive body lay completely still in the center of the combat ring, while Captain Taman stood over him, barely breathing hard from the brief confrontation. The silence that followed was so complete that the hum of the station's life support system seemed deafeningly loud. For nearly 30 seconds, no one moved or spoke as hundreds of alien minds tried to process what they had just witnessed. The legendary General Kralik, who had won battles that saved entire star systems, was lying unconscious at the feet of a human who looked like he could be blown over by a strong wind. The impossibility of it made some aliens wonder if they were having a shared hallucination. Captain Taman knelt beside the fallen general and placed 2 fingers against his thick neck to check for a pulse. The steady heartbeat confirmed that Kralik was alive, but would be unconscious for several hours due to the precise nerve strike that had shut down his motor functions. The human stood up and called for medical assistance in the same calm voice he had used throughout the evening. The first alien to break the silence was a young Vextar soldier who whispered a single word that carried clearly in the quiet hall. He said "impossible" over and over again while staring at the scene with all 4 of his eyes wide with shock. His reaction seemed to break some kind of spell, and suddenly, everyone was talking at once in dozens of different languages. Some aliens insisted that the fight had been fixed somehow because there was no way a human could defeat a Krillian general in fair combat. Others claimed that Captain Taman must have used some kind of hidden weapon or illegal enhancement that gave him unfair advantages. A few of the smarter observers began asking each other questions about human fighting techniques and military training. The medical team arrived within minutes and began examining General Kralik with advanced scanning equipment. Their leader was a tall, thin alien with 6 arms who announced that the general had suffered severe neurological disruption, but no permanent damage. He said that Kralik would recover completely, but would need several days of rest and treatment. As the medical team carefully transported the unconscious general out of the dining hall, word of what had happened began spreading throughout Olympus 7 at light speed. Aliens who had missed the fight gathered around those who had witnessed it, listening to descriptions with growing amazement and concern. The story grew more dramatic with each telling, but the basic facts remained unchanged. Sergeant Bora approached her captain as the crowd slowly began to disperse and spoke quietly so only he could hear. She said that what he had just done would change everything for humans in the Galactic Defense Union. The other species would never again be able to dismiss them as weak creatures who did not belong among real warriors. Private Jinho and the other human soldiers gathered around Captain Taman with expressions of awe and respect. They had always known their captain was an exceptional fighter, but seeing him defeat one of the galaxy's most feared warriors was beyond anything they had imagined. Several of them wanted to know how he had learned to fight like that against alien opponents. Taman explained that Earth's military had been preparing for galactic warfare much longer than most people realized. For decades, human scientists and martial artists had been studying alien anatomy and developing techniques specifically designed to overcome the physical advantages that other species possessed. What they lacked in size and strength, they made up for with knowledge and precision. He told his team that every pressure point and nerve cluster in Krillian anatomy had been mapped and studied by human researchers. Korean special forces had practiced these techniques for years using detailed models and simulations until the movements became automatic. The same information existed for every major species in the Galactic Defense Union. The implications of what Captain Taman had revealed began to sink in among the remaining alien observers. Humans had not stumbled blindly into galactic society as everyone had assumed. Instead, they had been methodically preparing for this moment, studying their potential allies and enemies with scientific precision. This level of preparation suggested intelligence and long-term planning that few species had credited humans with possessing over the following hours. News of the fight spread to every corner of Olympus 7, and then to other stations throughout the galaxy. Aliens who had never heard of humans before suddenly wanted to know everything about Earth's military capabilities. The footage of a tiny human defeating General Kralik was watched millions of times as beings tried to understand how such a thing was possible. Military commanders across the galaxy began requesting detailed reports about human feel. 3 days after the fight that shocked the galaxy, Captain Taman walked through the corridors of Olympus 7 and marveled at how completely everything had changed. Alien soldiers who passed him in the hallways now stopped to salute or nod respectfully, instead of staring with amusement. Some even stepped aside to let him pass, showing the kind of deference usually reserved for high-ranking officers or war heroes. The medical bay where General Kralik was recovering had become an unexpected gathering place for military leaders from across the station. Officers from dozens of different species came to visit the fallen general, but also to catch glimpses of the human who had defeated him. The story of their fight had spread far beyond Olympus 7 and was being discussed in military academies throughout the galaxy. When Taman arrived at the medical bay, he found General Kralik sitting up in bed, looking much smaller without his imposing uniform and weapons. The massive Krillian's stone-like skin was pale, and his yellow eyes showed a mixture of curiosity and something that might have been respect. He gestured for the human captain to sit in a chair beside his bed. General Kralik spoke quietly, his voice lacking the booming arrogance it had carried just days earlier. He thanked Taemin for agreeing to visit and admitted that he had seriously underestimated human capabilities. He said that in over 40 years of military service he had never been defeated so completely by an opponent he had thought was inferior. The general asked detailed questions about the fighting techniques Taemin had used against him. He wanted to understand how the human had known exactly where to strike to cause maximum damage to Krillian anatomy. He was particularly curious about the final blow that had rendered him unconscious without causing permanent injury. Captain Taemin explained that humans had been studying alien biology and developing countermeasures for decades before making contact with the Galactic Defense Union. He said that Earth scientists understood that humans would always be physically weaker than most other species, so they had focused on finding ways to overcome those disadvantages through knowledge and precision. He described how Korean martial artists had adapted ancient fighting techniques to work against alien opponents by studying their nerve systems and identifying vulnerable points. The goal was never to cause permanent harm, but to disable threats quickly and efficiently. General Kralik listened with growing respect as he realized the depth of preparation that humans had invested in their galactic debut. The conversation continued for over an hour, with both warriors sharing stories about their military experiences and discussing the philosophical differences between human and alien approaches to combat. Kralik admitted that most galactic species relied primarily on their natural physical advantages and had never developed the sophisticated fighting systems that humans had created. By the end of their meeting, something unexpected had happened between the two former opponents. General Kralik formally apologized for his disrespectful behavior in the dining hall and asked if Captain Taemin would be willing to teach Krillian soldiers some basic human fighting techniques. This request represented a complete reversal of the power dynamic that had existed just days earlier. Taemin agreed to provide training sessions for interested Krillian soldiers, but warned that mastering human martial arts required patience and dedication that might be difficult for warriors accustomed to relying on raw strength. General Kralik assured him that his troops were eager to learn and would follow whatever training regimen the human captain recommended. News of this alliance between the defeated general and the human who had beaten him spread quickly throughout the station and beyond. Military analysts across the galaxy began discussing the implications of cross-species combat training and what it might mean for future operations against the Shadow Swarm. Within a week, Captain Taemin found himself teaching classes to mixed groups of alien soldiers who wanted to learn human fighting techniques. The training sessions were held in the station's largest gymnasium and were attended by beings from over 20 different species. The demand was so high that additional sessions had to be scheduled to accommodate everyone who wanted to participate. Sergeant Bora and the other human soldiers also became instructors, sharing their knowledge of tactics, strategy, and survival skills with eager alien students. Private Jinho discovered he had a talent for teaching and was soon leading classes on human military history and the development of asymmetric warfare techniques. The humans were also learning from their alien colleagues who shared their own specialized knowledge and combat techniques. This exchange of information and skills created new hybrid fighting styles that were more effective than anything either side had developed independently. The cooperation that emerged from that first confrontation was producing benefits that no one had anticipated. General Kralik recovered completely from his injuries and returned to active duty with a transformed perspective on human capabilities. He became one of humanity's strongest advocates within the Union command structure, arguing that humans should be given positions of responsibility equal to their demonstrated abilities rather than being treated as junior partners. The general requested that Captain Taman be assigned as his military advisor and liaison officer for human forces. This appointment gave Taman direct input into strategic planning sessions and ensured that human perspectives would be considered in future military operations. It was an unprecedented level of influence for a newly arrived species. The changes at Olympus 7 were soon replicated at other military installations throughout the galaxy. As word spread about human combat effectiveness and training methods, alien commanders who had previously dismissed humans as unimportant began requesting human officers for their staffs and human soldiers for their units. Earth's government received formal requests from dozens of alien species for military cooperation agreements and technology-sharing partnerships. The planet that had been ignored as an insignificant newcomer suddenly found itself at the center of galactic military planning and strategic discussions. The Shadow Swarm remained a constant threat, lurking at the edges of known space and preparing for their next assault on galactic civilization. But when that attack finally came, the defenders would include human soldiers fighting alongside their alien allies using hybrid tactics and techniques that neither side could have developed alone. Captain Lee Taman stood at the observation deck of Olympus 7, looking out at the stars and thinking about how much had changed since that first day in the dining hall. The fight with General Kralik had been just the beginning of humanity's journey to earn respect and recognition in the galactic community. The lesson learned that day had spread throughout the galaxy. Never underestimate an opponent based on their size or appearance, because true strength comes in many different forms. Humans had proven that intelligence, preparation, and skill could overcome any physical disadvantage when applied with precision and determination. The Yaoki future was uncertain, with the Shadow Swarm growing stronger and new challenges emerging every day. But humanity now faced those challenges as equals among the stars, with allies who respected their capabilities and contributions. The galaxy had learned that humans were not the weakest link in galactic defense, but rather a secret weapon that had been hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to reveal their true potential.